Family. Tapped in family. Before we crack the door on tonight's chapter, drop a like on this frame, hit that share button, and pass this to the one homie who still swears he don't follow rap drama. Trust me, after tonight, he's going to be following it like it's the stock market. Because what's about to unfold behind the glass in downtown Los Angeles isn't just another rapper versus rapper cycle. It's the moment the West Coast pulled its own mask off. It's the moment we found out that the loudest name in Compton has been sitting in a studio all week with the one person the West Coast supposedly closed the door on. It's the moment Kendrick Lamar didn't have to say a single word, and the entire hip-hop machine started rearranging itself around his silence. Kendrick Lamar is in his film cave working on his craft. Kendrick Lamar is untouchable. Kendrick Lamar is chilling. And while Kendrick Lamar is chilling, the game is doing what the game has always done, talking, twitching, name-dropping, half-swinging, chasing a spotlight that keeps drifting one time zone away from him. Buckle in, because tonight I'm laying every card, every DM, every leak, every clip, every off-mic aside on the table, and by the end of this you're going to understand exactly why the industry is on tilt, exactly why Top Dawg had to pick up the phone in real time, and exactly why Drake, yes, Drake, was spotted walking into a Los Angeles studio session that the game's own security team already leaked to the internet. This is bigger than a beef. This is a coronation night that never got its official crown, and now every man in the room is trying to grab it before Kendrick Lamar even blinks. Let me put you back in the room where we left off. Last chapter, we ended on a runway. The game was hovering over the studio door. Stat Quo was doing his diplomatic dance on the third verse circuit. Wack 100 was sending smoke signals from the sideline. And Kendrick Lamar? Kendrick Lamar was doing what Kendrick Lamar does, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because a man who already ended the biggest beef of the modern era doesn't have to speak. Kendrick Lamar's silence is the loudest track on the West Coast right now, and every rapper in Los Angeles is trying to talk over it. But here's where the story turns. Here's where the chapter cracks open. Because the game, and I say this with the respect I'm always going to hold for his pen, the game has spent the last decade running the exact same play. He shows up. He hovers. He drops a name. He rides a wave. And when the wave crashes, he pretends he was never in the water. That was Mark 1 on the ledger. Mark 2 on the ledger came the night JRock was shooting his music video in the game's own backyard. And what did the game do? He pulled up in a red Escalade nobody recognized, walked onto set in an LRG hoodie zipped high enough to cover half his face, threw a dub in the air like he was in witness protection, and dipped. That was the introduction of a man who wanted the credit for supporting Top Dawg Entertainment without ever taking the reputational risk of being seen doing it. The younger generation of TDE saw it. The neighborhood saw it. Kendrick Lamar saw it. And Kendrick Lamar filed it. Now before we get to Mark 3, I need to lay a historical frame on the table, because you cannot understand this week's studio session without understanding who the game has always been when the lights go up. This is the man who stormed out of G-Unit at the height of its commercial dominance, beefed with 50 Cent so loudly that the culture had to build a press conference bridge, with Minister Farrakhan on the stage, cameras rolling, the whole country watching, just to get the two of them to shake hands. And what happened the moment the cameras cut? The game went right back to dissing 50 Cent within the calendar month. That is not an opinion. That is the record. That is a man who treats peace treaties like commercial breaks. So when you hear the game's camp insist this week that there is love for Kendrick Lamar, understand that the word love in the game's vocabulary has a documented expiration date, and the expiration date is always printed on the back of whatever project he has coming next. That context is not a side note. That context is the whole machine. Mark 3 on the ledger, the road stories. If you've been in the game long enough, you've heard the whispers. On tour, the game was flexing over the room, walking past homies who tried to be cordial, ducking the daps, keeping the chip on his shoulder screwed on tight enough that nobody could unscrew it. And still, nobody on TDE ever publicly said a word. Because that's not how they move. That's not how the little brother from Compton was raised. Kendrick Lamar's team files everything and speaks about none of it. Until the ledger gets too heavy to carry quietly. Mark 4 on the ledger, the coronation night at LA House of Blues. Dr. Dre in the crowd. Snoop Dogg on the stage. DJ Quick on the stage. Corrupt on the stage. The old guard passing the West Coast crown to the little homie from Compton in front of every camera that mattered. And who came strolling in uninvited, allegedly, with the fake smile, the fake dap, the fake hug? Family, you already know. The same man who spent the next 9 years insisting he was the reason Kendrick Lamar even ate. The same man who, according to Maq Waap, was so visibly rattled that night he was practically choking on his own words. Fake grin. Fake grip. Fake gratitude. 3 brushstrokes and the portrait was already finished. Mark 5 on the ledger, the silent war with Rick Ross. When the Kendrick and Drake war reached its cinematic peak, Rick Ross rolled into the Kendrick corner, Metro Boomin rolled into the Kendrick corner, and half the industry rolled into the Kendrick corner. The game? The game rolled into the Drake corner and started throwing jabs at Rick Ross like Ross was the target he actually wanted. Stat Quo, and remember whose voice this is coming from, Stat Quo has openly said he personally talked the game off the ledge of dissing Kendrick Lamar directly on wax during that period. That's not a fan theory. That's not a rumor. That's Stat Quo, on camera, on a podcast, admitting he had to physically counsel the game against sending a bullet at Kendrick Lamar during the loudest month of the biggest beef of the century. Read that again. Read it slow. The man who now claims he always had love for it was one Stat Quo phone call away from becoming a casualty of the Not Like Us era. That's Mark 5. And before we reach Mark 6, I have to slow the tape down on the Stat Quo layer, because Stat Quo is doing something in this saga that almost nobody in the comments is catching. Stat Quo is not defending the game. Stat Quo is translating the game. There is a difference. When Stat Quo sat on the third verse circuit and said the game is misunderstood, that he keeps a chip on his shoulder, that he moves the way he moves for reasons only he knows, that was not a character reference. That was a hazard label. That was a former label mate telling the public, in the politest sentence he could legally construct, that the man cannot be managed, cannot be predicted, and cannot be trusted to stay inside the lines of his own narrative. And the proof arrived in real time, because Top Dog himself picked up a phone mid-broadcast and corrected the record on live air. Don't tell the story without the part where the game absolutely could reach Kendrick Lamar if the love was real, and don't forget the 100 video in Compton. When the boss of the label interrupts a podcast to fix the framing, that is not damage control. That is a receipt being stapled to the public record. Mark 6 on the ledger, the Coronation Night sequel, otherwise known as the Pop-Out. Kendrick Lamar throws a citywide love letter concert. The West Coast is on one stage. Every stripe, every set, every generation is embracing. The game is not there. The game did not receive an invitation, and even if he had, the game, by his own admission, did not want to be there. Instead, he pulls up to a random porch, opens up his phone camera, and delivers what has to be one of the most unhinged 5-minute monologues in modern hip-hop. I don't gotta be nowhere, I don't gotta do nothing, Drake my homie, Doc my little homie, I ain't never taking nothing away from him, I could be nowhere and everywhere at the same time. Family, that wasn't confidence. That was a man arguing with a version of himself in the mirror while the rest of the West Coast was on a stadium stage holding a torch that was never going to be passed to him. Mark 6 on the ledger. And every mark from here on gets worse. One more layer before we fast forward, because the Maq 100 wildcard matters here. Maq 100, the game's own longtime manager, the man who has historically defended every chaotic decision the game has ever made, has spent this entire cycle noticeably, measurably quiet on the defense and noticeably, measurably loud on the observation. When your own manager starts describing your moves instead of justifying them, the fortress has a door open. Family, I have watched Maq 100 carry water for this man through situations that had no water left to carry. And this week, the bucket is on the ground. Nobody in the game's inner orbit is fighting the framing. They are all just standing around the frame, describing it. That silence is a siren. Now let's fast forward to this week, because this is where the chapter blows open. The game hits a stage in downtown Los Angeles. Emotional. Sweating. Yelling into the microphone about his dead homies, his sick mother, his past father, his West Side allegiance. You cannot question my love for LA. Nothing beats LA. Nobody beats LA. I'm from Cedar Block Piru. West Side or nothing. It's cemented. It's stitched. Family, I've watched this footage back 6 times, and I need you to understand something. a man who has to publicly recite his allegiance to his own city on a stage in his own city is a man who already knows the city has questions. You don't defend what nobody's attacking. You don't clarify what nobody's confused about. The game was pleading his case before a jury he refuses to admit is deliberating. And while he was pleading it, his security team, the one with the black Chevy logos and the studio access cards, was already posting behind-the-scenes photos with a laugh emoji and a caption that read, "Not to hurt anybody's feelings, but Los Angeles Confidential, that will be the game in the studio. Signed, G Magic. Black Wall Street." And this, family, is where the whole story stopped being a rap blog rumor and started being a paper trail. Because a creator you may not have on your radar yet, Chilling with Mooney, slid into G Magic's DMs directly, and G Magic, being a man who has never once in his life understood the difference between confidence and a confession, answered. She asked him, "Is the game really in the studio?" G Magic replied. She asked him, "Is he working on a response?" G Magic replied. She asked him, "Is anyone else in there?" And G Magic, on record, in a screenshot that Chilling with Mooney has already published across her platforms, replied, "Not sure. I left when Drake showed up. I was tired." Read it again. I left when Drake showed up. Drake. Aubrey Graham. The same Drake whose name the game has been dragging through his own verses for 2 years. The same Drake whose album the game insisted he had no involvement with, no allegiance to, no phone line to. The same Drake who is supposedly, allegedly, the sworn opposition of the entire Compton coalition. That Drake walked into a game session in Los Angeles this week. And the game's own security guy left the room when it happened because he was tired. You catching this? Now let the tape talk for a second, because I want you to hear the rest of what G Magic said, because it is the greatest self-inflicted wound I have ever seen a Black Wall Street employee commit on their own boss's behalf. Mooney presses him. She says, "G, people out here are saying the game is letting Drake use him to divide the West Coast. This can't be what he wants his legacy to be." G Magic's response, and I quote, "Them people can say what they want. Hip-hop is the only professional choice that don't require a high school diploma. We got love for dot. That would upset people. Just talk. Family. Let me sit with you for a moment on that sentence, because it does more damage than any diss track the game could possibly write. First, them people can say what they want. That's the fan base. That's the culture. That's the paying customer. Second, hip-hop is the only professional choice that don't require a high school diploma. Sir. What are you even trying to imply? Are you saying the fans are uneducated? Are you saying your boss made it out without formal schooling and should therefore be shielded from criticism? Are you saying rap is a lower profession that shouldn't be held to standards? Whatever the read is, all three reads are terrible. And third, we got love for dot. Family, when a camp has to keep repeating that they have love for someone who has not spoken to them in almost a decade, that is not love. That is a hostage negotiation with the public. And let me be surgical about why the stage rant matters before we zoom out, because I have seen 100 commenters wave it off as just an emotional performance. No. Family, when a man stands on a stage in the city he claims and starts itemizing his grief, the dead homies, the sick mother, the gone father, the grandparents buried, and welds that grief to the sentence, "You cannot question my love for LA," he is not performing. He is testifying. He is building a defense exhibit for a trial the public has not formally announced. The game knows the questions are stacking. The game knows the ledger is public. And the game chose a stage instead of a statement because a stage lets you cry and call it courage. I am not mocking the man's pain, the pain is real, the losses are real. I am documenting the maneuver. Grief is real. Timing is also real. And the timing of that testimony, landing in the exact week his security team leaked a studio session, is not a coincidence. It is choreography. Let's zoom back out. Because while G Magic is out here setting his boss's public relations on fire in a Chilling with Mooney inbox, Maq Waap and the Apollo Studio Circle are having a completely separate conversation, and it's the conversation that puts the last nail in the wooden box. Maq Waap has spent all week half-jokingly, half-seriously warning the game that if he keeps pulling the pin, he's going to force JRock to come outside. And you have to remember who JRock is. JRock is the caged wolf. JRock is the one TDE affiliate who never had to say a word during the Drake battle because his sharpness on wax has never been in doubt. And we just heard JRock on that new sequence with Kendrick and Rayvon Owen. I don't remember if it's Here Comes the Boom or where exactly that record is landing on the track list, but I can tell you this, JRock sounded like a man who has been sitting on a rack of unopened knives for a decade. If the game runs his hand this week, JRock is the one who's going to cut it off. The Room and the Apollo agreed. Maq Waap agreed. 2TS agreed. 2TS, and if you don't know 2TS, you need to know 2TS, is the former security head for the game who now walks the perimeter for Kendrick Lamar. That's not a symbolic switch. That's not a rumor. That's a man who spent years standing behind the game's back and now stands behind Kendrick Lamar's back, and the fact that he switched is by itself a diplomatic incident nobody in the game's camp wants to talk about. Now Maq Waap sat on that Apollo couch and laid it out plain. He said, I'm only responding to this stuff because the actual rapper the homies rock with is not going to entertain it. He said, I'm just poking my fun. He said, it ain't that deep. He said, it's really surface level. He said, the game is in the studio, he'll probably drop new game music, cool, I'll listen. But then Maq Waap said the part that lit the whole room up. He said, the game is dissing. He said, the game is dissing everybody. He said, the game is going to name Top Dog. He said, the game is going to try to jab at JRock. He said, the game is going to send a needle at Kendrick Lamar himself. And Maq Waap didn't say any of that with excitement. He said it with the exhaustion of a man who has already watched this movie twice and knows how it ends. Because the game has always been a maniac on the scene type. You give the game a microphone, a studio, and a chip on his shoulder, and he is going to say the thing he was told to keep tucked. 2TS said it. Maq Waap said it. The whole room agreed. But family, let me pause on something Maq Waap said that is the loudest sentence nobody in the room emphasized. Maq Waap said, the game already told the lie for years that Top Dog never wanted to sign Kendrick Lamar. He said, that lie has never been true. He said, I was in the room with you and Top Dog. He said, you weren't trying to sign him either. Sit with that. The game has been telling the world for a decade that he was Kendrick Lamar's earliest believer, while the very insiders who watched the meetings happen are now stepping forward one by one to say, you weren't there for that. You didn't want that. You wanted to be seen wanting that. That is the difference between a supporter and an opportunist, and every voice in the current cycle is pointing at the second one. Now understand what the Apollo conversation really was, structurally, before we deal with the elephant. That couch was not gossip. That couch was a war council wearing a comedy mask. Maq Waap laughing about getting JRock off the leash is the same sentence as a general joking about a launch code. The laughter is the pressure valve, the message is the payload. And the payload was unmistakable. The homies will not entertain the game directly, but the homies have already decided who answers if the line gets crossed. There is a chain of command in Compton right now, and the game is not in it. Kendrick Lamar does not call. Kendrick Lamar does not text. Kendrick Lamar does not need to. The architecture answers for him. That is what a decade of filing receipts builds, a defense system that activates without the king lifting a finger. Now let me deal with the elephant in the studio. Because the internet has already run laps with the theory that the game has been ghostwriting for Drake behind the scenes. Let me tell you my honest read on that. I don't buy it. Not because I don't respect the game's pen, I always will, but because nothing on Iceman, nothing on the recent Drake output, nothing at all in Drake's current vocabulary reads like a game bar. Not one line. Not the show your muscles sequence. Not the internet-fed verses. Not the internet taunt bars. The game, at his worst day in a studio, writes with more precision than Drake has written on his best day in the last 2 years. But, and here's the piece nobody wants to say out loud, that doesn't mean the game isn't in the room with Drake. Because, in the room and, on the pen, are two completely different levels of collusion. And the G-Magic screenshot doesn't say Drake sat down to write. It says Drake showed up. And when Drake shows up to a Compton studio session that is supposedly a Compton album, family, that is a diplomatic incident. That is a public relations catastrophe. That is a betrayal that the West Coast doesn't need a press release to interpret. Now let me tell you why this all matters, and let me tell you it in the plainest sentence I can build. Every time somebody in the culture has made noise about Kendrick Lamar's name, Kendrick Lamar has eventually addressed it musically. That's the pattern. That's the receipt. When Jay Electronica was popping his chest, we got the response on Untitled Unmastered, the "you can never end a career that never started" moment. When Joey Badass tried to summon him outside, Kendrick Lamar filed it and kept moving. When the Big Three conversation ignited into a war, Kendrick Lamar didn't just respond, he restructured the entire pop culture map for a year. So when the game spends 2 projects sliding jabs at Kendrick Lamar's name and now has Drake walking into his own Los Angeles session on the same week, the historical read is not that Kendrick Lamar lets it slide. The historical read is that Kendrick Lamar is currently in a room right now scribbling something with the game's name written under it in graphite. That's not a hope. That's not a fantasy. That's a pattern. And Kendrick Lamar does not break patterns, he ends careers with them. And while we're being honest about the room, let's be honest about the calendar, because the calendar is doing more talking this week than any microphone. The game is 45 years into a life that has already produced 2 certified classic albums, a Grammy nomination shelf, a documentary footprint, and a filmography most rappers would trade a limb for. He does not need this chapter. That is the tragedy at the center of the whole story. This is not a hungry newcomer clawing for a first look. This is a made man with a walled-off legacy choosing, voluntarily, to climb back over the wall and start a fight with a generation that already retired him politely. Every legend who came before him, Ice Cube, Snoop Dogg, DJ Quick, Corrupt, Warren G., found the transition. They became godfathers. They became curators. They became the men the young kings call for counsel. The game watched every single one of them make that turn and chose the on-ramp back to the battlefield instead. And the battlefield he chose belongs to a man who has never once had to raise his voice to clear it. Now, do I think Kendrick Lamar goes at top dog? Absolutely not. Do I think Kendrick Lamar answers the game with a full-scale diss album? Almost certainly not. But do I think Kendrick Lamar sends one surgical clip at the game the way he sent 1 surgical clip at Snoop, 1 at Wayne, 1 at Jay Electronica? Family, I'd bet my next paycheck on it. Because the culture has moved past the point where you can openly disrespect Kendrick Lamar and expect to walk into 2027 unbothered. Your smoke privileges have to be earned. Your smoke privileges can be revoked. And Kendrick Lamar has been revoking smoke privileges from grown men for the better part of 3 years. Whether the game realizes it or not, he is auditioning for a role he cannot survive. And Drake, my brother, Drake, the Six God, Drake, the man whose pen has already been publicly retired by a Compton monologue, Drake does not get an interlude on this. Drake does not get a feature on this. Drake's dissing privileges have been pulled indefinitely by a court order the culture already signed. Let me address one more sentence G Magic dropped, because it's the sentence that told the entire industry which way the wind is blowing. G Magic said, and this is a paraphrase, the game is about to pull the curtains back on these guys, and people ain't who they think they are. Family. When a camp starts talking in curtain-pulling metaphors, it means one of 2 things. Either the artist actually has something explosive, or the artist has nothing and the camp is trying to pre-manufacture the anticipation. In the game's case, both can be true simultaneously. He probably has bars ready. He probably has names queued up. He probably has receipts sharpened. And none of it will matter. Because the audience for this record is not the culture at large. The audience for this record is the game convincing himself, one more time, that he is still standing in the same room as Kendrick Lamar. And Kendrick Lamar has not been in that room since 2015. Now let's talk economics for 1 minute, because nobody in this conversation wants to say the quiet math out loud. The game can still sell an amphitheater on legacy. The game can still fill 300 seats in a theater off name recognition alone. The game's pen, on a neutral beat with nothing at stake, still outwrites 90% of the active roster. None of that is in dispute, and I will go to my grave defending the man's technical ability. But ability is not demand. Demand is what happens when the culture leans forward, and the culture has not leaned forward for a game release in years, which is precisely why every rollout for the last half-decade has been stapled to somebody else's name. First it was the 50 Cent anniversary cycle. Then it was the Eminem proximity play. Then it was the Kendrick tribute framing. Now it is the Drake studio leak. Family, a rollout that requires another man's gravity is not a rollout. It is an orbit. And orbits do not get to choose when they pass the sun. Let me pause and remind you why this saga is even in the current news cycle. Because in the last 12 months, Kendrick Lamar has released GNX. He has locked the Not Like Us cultural moment into permanent record. He has performed on a stage that broke Super Bowl streaming numbers. He has appeared in fashion campaigns, film production windows, brand alignments, and generational legacy conversations. He does not need this beef. He does not want this beef. And that is exactly why the game's camp keeps trying to manufacture it. Because in a market where the king is calm, the only way to sell a record is to make the king angry. Except the king doesn't get angry anymore. The king files, revises, and executes when the time is right. And the time has not been right, until, arguably, this week. Because this week is different. This week Drake showed up. This week security posted the leak. This week G Magic put it in an inbox. This week Chilling with Mooney published the screenshots. This week Maq Waap and 2TS sat on a couch and agreed that the game is going to swing at multiple names. This week Top Dog himself, if the whispers are accurate, has already been briefed. And every single voice around Kendrick Lamar, from Wack 100 hovering outside, to Maq Waap on the Apollo bench, to Stat Quo on his third verse circuit, is saying the same thing in different sentences. This cannot be ignored. This will be answered. This will be surgical. This will be short. This will be enough. And one more thing before I talk to you as a fan, because the 2TS dimension deserves its own paragraph in the public record. Understand what it means when a man's former head of security, the person who stood between him and the world for years, who knows the hotel routines, the studio habits, the unguarded phone calls, the private temper, voluntarily crosses the street to protect the very person that man is now circling. That is not a staffing change. That is a verdict. Security professionals do not switch camps over money alone at that level, they switch when the room stops feeling defensible. And 2TS has not said one disrespectful word publicly about the game, which, family, is the loudest disrespect available. The silence of a man who could talk is worth more than the noise of a man who cannot stop. Every week that passes with 2TS standing quietly behind Kendrick Lamar is a week the entire industry reads as a referendum on which room feels safer to stand in. And the game knows it. The game has to know it. That is the kind of detail that keeps a man in a studio at 3 in the morning writing verses he swears are not about anybody. Now I want to talk to you as a fan for 1 minute. As a fan, do I want a game verse from Kendrick Lamar? No. I don't. I am not sitting here rooting for anyone to catch a bullet. But as a historian of this culture, I can also tell you that when a certain line gets crossed enough times, the response is no longer optional, it is inevitable. And every single mark on the game's ledger has crossed a line. The hooded appearance at the JRock shoot. The tour attitude. The fake smile coronation. The silent Ross war. The unhinged porch monologue during the pop-out. The 2 studio projects of Jabs. The security team leak. The Drake studio visit. That is 8 receipts stacked on one man's desk. Even the most patient king in modern hip-hop has a shelf, and that shelf is now sagging. And here's the tell that almost nobody caught this week, the sentence-level detail that separates the viewers from the students. Go back and listen to the cadence of the game's stage rant one more time. Not the words, the cadence. He is stacking his sentences the way a writer stacks verses. He is not rambling. He is rehearsing. Every pause is a punch setup. Every callback to the dead homies is a hook placement. That performance was not a man losing control of his emotions on stage. That was a man test-driving the emotional architecture of an album intro in front of a live crowd to see which lines made the room lean forward. The game was workshopping. On stage. In public. In the same week his own security leaked the session. Family, once you hear it, you cannot unhear it, the rant was the rollout. The grief was the trailer. And the album, whenever it lands, will open with those exact sentences, cleaned up, mixed down, and aimed. Which brings us to the last piece of the chapter, the album. Because the game's camp is now suggesting that not only is he in the studio, but that the album is essentially done. If that's true, we are days, not weeks, days, away from a project that will pretend to be about legacy and will actually be about relevance. There will be a track that name-drops Kendrick Lamar without naming Kendrick Lamar. There will be a track that pretends to praise Compton while lowering Compton's flag. There will be a track with a Drake ad-lib buried in the second verse that only diehards will catch. And there will be an interview cycle where the game insists none of the songs were about anyone in particular. We have seen this playbook. We have watched this playbook. We have annotated this playbook. And in every previous cycle where the game has tried to run this exact play, Kendrick Lamar has waited exactly long enough to let the game exhaust the news cycle, and then Kendrick Lamar has released one piece of music that made the entire prior news cycle irrelevant. That is the pattern. That has always been the pattern. And unless the West Coast has been rewritten in the last 72 hours, that will be the pattern again. So here is where I leave you tonight. The game is behind the glass. Drake walked into the room. G Magic tapped out. Chilling with Mooney published the receipt. Maq Waap has already forecast the fallout. 2TS is standing behind Kendrick Lamar with a phone in one hand and a folder in the other. Stat Quo is trying to keep the diplomatic door cracked while Top Dog is reportedly moving to seal it. And Kendrick Lamar, the man whose name has been in every one of these sentences and who has not personally spoken one syllable of any of this, Kendrick Lamar is in a room somewhere in Los Angeles, or Carson, or wherever the film worklock happens, quietly writing the sentence that ends the chapter for all of them. Because that is what Kendrick Lamar does. Kendrick Lamar does not respond to noise. Kendrick Lamar edits the noise out. And when he is done editing, the noise never returns. The final read from my seat is simple. The game is not going to win this. The game was not going to win this from the moment he walked onto that JRock set with a hoodie zipped up to his eyebrows. Every mark on the ledger since then has been another zip pulled higher. And this week, with Drake showing up, with the security leak, with the G Magic self-immolation, with the Apollo panel forecast, with 2TS already logistically positioned on the other side of the war room, the zipper finally reached the top. The game is now fully hidden inside his own hoodie. And the man he keeps trying to poke has never had to unzip anything in his life. Kendrick Lamar is standing outside the entire situation, in daylight, with his hands in his pockets, quietly working on the next thing. And the next thing is going to hurt. And before you head to the comments, sit with the symmetry of how this chapter closes, because it mirrors how it opened. It opened with a king in silence and a challenger behind glass. It closes the exact same way, except now the glass is cracked, the session is public, the security team is the source, the manager is describing instead of defending, the translator has been corrected live on air by the boss, the war council has picked its answer, and the whole city is watching one man talk about love while sharing a room with the opposition. 8 receipts. 1 ledger. 0 responses required. That is the position Kendrick Lamar has spent a decade building, and it is the reason a single screenshot from a security guard's inbox can tilt the entire coastline. Power that has to announce itself is already negotiating. Power that never speaks, just collects. I want you to drop your read in the comments. I want to know what you think Kendrick Lamar does. I want to know whether you think the game's album goes gold before it goes forgotten. I want to know whether you think Drake was in that studio for a feature, a favor, or a funeral. I want to know whether 2TS is going to speak on the Switch before this year is out. I want to know whether JRock finally lets one loose. I want to know whether you think Stat Quo can survive this cycle as a diplomat or whether he becomes a casualty of it. Whatever your read is, put it in the comments, and I promise you I read every single one before the next chapter drops. If this is the first drop of mine you've landed on, tap that subscribe button, tap that notification bell, and roll with the family, because we're in a live saga right now, and the next chapter is going to move fast. I appreciate every one of you for staying tapped in from top to bottom. I'll catch you on the next drop. Stay tapped in. Family over noise. Family over fame. Family over everything. Peace. The glory of standing tall while the room is measuring your shadow is a language the neighborhood taught me before the microphones did. Independence over invitation. Silence over spectacle. Craft over camera. The first man in the family to sign his own paperwork twice. The only student in the class who read the fine print. Conversations with the woman I love about the numbers we don't post. 5 accounts that all know each other. Every day is another entry in the ledger. The town criers talk their commentary because it feeds them, I let it feed them because it also feeds me. I could ghostwrite this life in my sleep. Been sharpening pens for kids who now sell out arenas. Been fighting shadows the streets never named. I could turn any birthday into New Year's if the tape asked me to. Don't push me toward the version of me the neighborhood keeps in a locked drawer. This is South Side rebuilding, moving furniture like a warehouse. Life on pause. No insurance in the pocket. Lifeline dialed. So you want to be a mogul? Let me tell you about the fires I stepped over to sit here. The ones I dodged. The ones I sold for scrap. The sympathy calls that showed up 2 years late. The stakes I stacked by hand. I had to evolve, because standing still in this city is just a slower way to disappear. Peace, family. See you inside the next chapter.